Hi, I'm Corbin Johnson, and I'll be covering social distancing and its impacts within higher education. Now, all of us have been impacted by social distancing to some point or aspect of our daily lives, whether that be economically as businesses shut down during this time, or that be relationally, as we're no longer able to really connect or talk with friends and family in the same fashion that we would have been able to do before this epidemic. And basically, the main point of what I'll be covering is college students inherently really stand to lose a lot by the negative mental health impacts of social distancing and not being able to see your peers and friends in that way. Some of the topics I'll be covering are basically defining social distancing and its implications for students and what it really means to be a student during this time, the effects of social isolation and how social isolation really ties in to the whole social distancing thing, and then furthermore, how mental health's correlation within social isolation becomes really an inhibiting factor for educational performance, and further on, what students and we as a community can do to improve mental health and to really, I guess, provide students and schools with what they need to come out on top of this time. So, to begin with, what is social distancing? Now, that may seem like a somewhat asinine question given we've all been experiencing this for the past month or two now, but the University of California at Los Angeles University of Rochester Medical Center defines social distancing as not interacting with anyone outside your household and limiting trips to places where you might interact with other people. Now, this sounds a lot like the definition of social isolation. It's basically distancing yourself from social interaction and events where you're interacting with other people. Now, us as humans, us as college students, us as teachers, we crave social interaction, and to be deprived of that is a huge thing and impacting factor of our mental health. Most college students at this point have moved back. Essentially, what this means for college students have moved back home and are now living solely with their family, solely with however many people they originally lived with back home. They're leaving their colleges, leaving their apartments at universities, and coming back and just being isolated in their houses with little to no interaction with the outside world, as per the government's recommendation that we stay at home unless it's for a necessary activity. Now, social isolation and educational performance. Dr. Badi A. Haka defines social isolation and really shows the flow of how social isolation impacts us educationally through cognitive performance through this flow chart he put together that shows how social isolation not only solely is the factor that slows down cardiovascular function and basically decreases cognitive function, but cardiovascular function itself decreasing is also a factor that decreases cognitive function. So solely social isolation is a decreasing factor, but it is also a decreasing factor of cardiovascular function that further goes on to further de-escalate any cognitive activity within a student. The University of Syracuse is doing a study currently and taking input from their students on the amount of screen time and how that's really impacting their daily lives, moods, and abilities. And this is limiting it to screen time, not only as in courses, because most schools are online now as it is, but also social media and other things like that. Because growing up in the 21st century, that's really all we've been given to do during times like these. The causes of social isolation vary a ton and are not limited just to students, obviously, but the major factors of that social isolation causes within students are anxiety and depression, which are both mentally inhibiting factors. Social isolation also causes early onset dementia and shortened life expectancy, and those are just the long-term effects. These are the short-term effects that we can see right now within students. The University of Cincinnati did a study based on the University of California at Los Angeles loneliness scale, which is essentially a 50-question, basically survey or document, 0 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agrees, 3 being neutral, with the questions that it asks regarding to loneliness and how a person feels. And through that study, they were able to form 2 distinct groups, one being the lonely group and one being the socially interactive group. The lonely group came out of the year-long study with a 1.2 point lower GPA average, that's the mean average, than the group that was strongly socially active and faced no trials of social isolation, which is a monumentous, really, grade point difference if you're really looking at these 2 groups and seeing how big that shift is between the 2 of them. It's an absolutely enormous in the scale of things, considering it's a 4-point scale. So what can we really do to remedy this, and what can we do to make a difference and basically come together and heal during this time and become better for it? So we can, as students, form a schedule, as in live a daily life. You don't want the days to meld together and sort of become purposeless, and this was in the previously mentioned study, the University of Cincinnati study. Limit time on devices, and that's of course not Zoom or anything that would be socially beneficial as in interacting with others, but limiting time on social media, because that's also shown to create a depressive shift, leading to a decrease in educational performance. And then connect with friends and family via Zoom and other services. Sort of ties in with the limit time on devices. You don't want to limit time, obviously, on these devices for the aforementioned reasons. And then finally, it's kind of ridiculous to rely on students solely and expect us to come together and basically fix ourselves through this. The University of California, Berkeley, and 150 other universities have implemented a pass-fail system. And some of those even going back to when we first began isolation. Obviously now the damage has been done. Semester's almost over. It's irreversible at this point. But the pass-fail system allows students not to be so negatively impacted by their possible shortcomings within their isolation and within the aforementioned negative effects of social distancing. I hope through this presentation you'll have garnered something beneficial, either in understanding what social distancing really means or as a way to cope with it, as not only college students but all of us as the American people are facing this right now. Thank you.